Good evening, everyone. I want to apologize. We're pulled over a little bit on executive session. I'd like to welcome the two co-superintendents, Aaron Townsend, Malia Nally, as well as the chair of the Board of Education, Sarah Lentz, and my counterpart on the Finance Committee, Sarah Bryden. We're populating the screen as I see it. All right, I'll take this opportunity to invite my committee colleagues to introduce themselves and then be followed by our counselors who've elected to participate in this evening's meeting. I'll begin with the counselor from District 1.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Anna Trevorrow, member of the Finance Committee from District 1.
Hi, everybody. Andrew Zaro. I represent District 4. Nice to see you all.
Councillor Dion, do you want me to go? I'm Kate Snyder, Mayor, ex officio member of the committee, non-voting.
Roberto Rodriguez, at-large councillor, not a member of the committee.
Pius Ali, at-large member, not a member of the committee.
Councillor Dion, you are muted.
That could be the safest thing that ever happened to this committee, by being muted. Nonetheless, I would like to invite members of the Board of Education to introduce themselves, please.
I can start. My name is Sarah Lentz. My pronouns are she, hers, and I'm the chair of the school board, and I'll pass it to Aura.
Hi, everybody. I'm Aura Russell-Better, pronouns she, her, and I'm District 4 board member and not on the committee, but just joining for this evening's meeting. Thank you. Oh, and I'll move it to Member Bryden.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Bryden. I'm the District 5 school board representative, and I'm the chair of the Finance Operations and Personnel Committee. I believe, let's see, I will pass it to board member Youssef.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Youssef. I'm a school board member, and I am a member of Finance Committee. Thank you.
I'm Emily Figdor, District 2 representative and member of the Finance Committee.
And I'm Julie Opperman, District 3, member of the School Finance Committee.
I am Miki Bondo, District 1 rep and vice chair of the board. I have no idea what's wrong with my video, but I can see all of you, but I don't think so you can see me.
That's all right, Mickey.
And we have Nylette.
Nylette Billiou, she, her, they, and at-large representative.
Beautiful. And then I think we also have Representative Ben Grant on the line as well. Thank you, Board Member Grant. Do you want to introduce yourself?
You're muted, Ben. You might have to mute yourself.
School board member.
Board Member Grant is an at-large board member.
All right.
I'll introduce you, Ben.
I see him, so that's good.
Okay, and I think that's all.
All right. I'll turn over to staff from the school if they'd like to identify themselves.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. This is Malia Nally, interim co-superintendent, she, her pronouns.
Good evening, everybody. Aaron Townsend, he, him pronouns, the other co-interim superintendent. Miranda.
Hi, everyone. Miranda Fasulo, budget director for the Portland Public Schools.
Terry.
Good evening, everyone. I'm the executive director of operations for the Portland Schools. My name is Terry Young.
I think that's it for us, Mark. Thank you.
All right. Mr. Naldoni, who are you with?
I am the controller for the city.
Okay. You got me. I think I know a lot of people. I guess I lose tonight. What an embarrassing way to start a meeting, huh? I should have said, interim manager Danielle West, could you introduce your staff? I would have prevented that misstep. Go ahead.
You could have prevented that. Interim city manager Danielle West. Obviously, Brendan O'Connell is here, as well as Bill on this call to help us this evening. And I think I'm looking down through. I'm on my phone because we're at the National League of Cities Conference in Washington, and so I may be turning my camera off at some point as we head to the airport momentarily. But really happy to be here tonight, and thank you for having us.
Okay. Have I missed anyone else? All right. We're going to start this evening with a presentation of the audit results by MARCUM LLP. So, Brendan, will you facilitate this piece with the auditors, please?
Sure. So the committee requested that you receive a report from the audit as soon as the audit was complete, and this was the first available joint city school meeting date. And we have the partner from our engagement, Alina Korsak, here with us from MARCUM LLP, and many of you may notice that that's a different name. And Alina will talk a little bit about how MARCUM acquired Melanson, which was the audit firm that the name that you may recognize. But I will turn it over to Alina for a presentation.
Then I have a PowerPoint to share, so I'd like to do that, and I will go ahead and do that now. As Brendan mentioned, there is a very quick firm update that I'd like to do, but it's brief. The focus of tonight's presentation is going to be in the summary audit results and the management letter. The firm update is, as Brendan mentioned, we got acquired by MARCUM. Melanson was a New England regional firm. MARCUM is a national firm. So on the latest available accounting today, which was 2022, there were 15th largest CPA firm in the country with 550 principals and 4,100 employees. This is the national footprint for MARCUM. We had 4 New England offices. Now combined with MARCUM's New England offices, we now have 10 offices in New England. We still going to be providing you with the team here in our Merrimack office in New Hampshire, but we do now have office in Portland as well, and as you could see, other places in New England. And now we'll start with the audit process. So what is a financial statement audit? It's obtaining evidence from the city about the amounts and disclosures that they have made in their financial statements. So we provide an opinion on the financial statement that the city provides to us for the audit. There could be a misconception sometimes about a financial statement audit. So to clarify, a financial statement audit is not an internal control examination. We do not give an opinion on the city's effectiveness of controls. However, as part of the financial statement audit, we do obtain an understanding of internal controls, and we test them on a sample basis. Now, this is only a second year being your auditor, although we call that late, but we know it's consistent with the timing how your previously financial statements were issued, which was March in the previous years as well. And I believe we are actually 2 weeks ahead this year, because I believe it was end of March last year and it was beginning of March this year. According to GFOA standards, usually it's considered within 6 months of year end is when the financial statements are the most meaningful. So our challenges, the challenges remain for the school and general assistance departments, and we'll go more into that when we touch on the management letter. I do want to compliment the school on closing timelier this year. So I think that's a good accomplishment on their part. We did repeat the material weakness on the management letter for controls and a significant deficiency. And we also have a new comment on general assistance this year, which, as I mentioned, we'll go through more when we touch on the management letter. On the ACRA, you'll see there has been some significant changes because the city early implemented 9496-101, and this was the implementation year for GASB 87. And GASB 87 had the most changes throughout your ACRA, and for those in the commercial world, it's a little bit similar to the FAS Unified Method of Accounting for leases. So currently you have new accounts there for right to use assets offset by lease payable. You also have lease receivable offset by deferred inflows. The one that did a major restatement for beginning balance was GASB 101, and that's uncompleted absences. And the biggest reason for that restatement is that the new standard talks about accrued vacation and sick and other types of compensated absences. It defines them more as time that's going to be taken later on, not just the cash out. So in this situation, where before the amounts were maxed out for the ones that were vested, and also for the ones that were maxed out per buyback policies, for example, where those types of vesting requirements and maxed out balances are no longer part of this calculation. So that is why there was a restatement to implement this new statement. And we gave you an unmodified opinion on your financial statements for all your opinion units. Some of the items we are formally required to communicate, for example, the one disagreements with management is one of them. And all of these required items that are formally communicated were listed on your governance letter. And in addition to governance letter, opinion on your ACRA, I just want to point out that that opinion does not include the transmittal letter, statistical session, MD&A, or RS. We also provided an opinion on the separate standalone JEPCOR financial statements. There's also some other minor items that go with that, like a covenant certificate, which is a no default certificate for debt covenants. We also provided a PFC audit report, and that's in passenger facility charges. The school assurance statement is a requirement for the state of Maine, and the management letter will talk about the one big item in addition to the city financial statements audit is the federal single audit, and we actually had to audit 6 of them. So there were 6 federal single audits required for year ending June 30, 2022. Now the state also has a health and human service single audit, and the last item is also unique to the state of Maine. It's a procedural form that gets filled out to the state auditor's office along with the whole package that goes to them. And now we'll talk about the management letter. So the first comment on the material weakness for the school's internal control structure is a repeat comment from prior year. It has been improved though. We mostly focused on the payroll side of this, as we've seen some improvements on the vendor cycle and also on the reporting and closing cycle. So focusing on the payroll, we noted that the segregation of duties issue again were for that fiscal year that we audited ending with June 30, 2022. We were concerned that because HR was not entering rates, for example, and there were not enough mitigating controls or oversight or verification prior to payroll going out, that could be an issue with not sufficient amount of mitigating controls. So we noted that we still thought payroll is a weakness, and additionally, we still had hard time going through the audit trails that were provided. Although they were provided late, but we just were missing pieces. It was not a complete audit trail for us to conclude. So while the school worked hard, we understand that they have many priorities that happened, especially during the time we were auditing in the fall, that took away time, and with the staffing shortages and everything else going on, there were some struggles wrapping that up. So we wanted to repeat this comment. And this one was also a repeat comment. It was not material weakness, which is the strongest type of comment. This is second strongest. This is a significant deficiency. And that's a repeat comment about just some weaknesses that have been identified in the audits related to these particular transactions. The fee cards, the cash receipts policy, student activity funds, and excess balances of the certification. So that in the schools, and also, just like there've been progress made in the first comment, the schools also been making progress on this as well. I understand there's been a new purchasing manager hired and different mitigating controls that are going in, and the school's still going to look into some of these. This was just an analytical type of comment that was repeated because it was more of a longer term implementation and resolution than just 1 year. And there's excess balance in Fund 242, which is a city other type of special revenue fund that has a lot of contributions. And that excess balance just hasn't been moved yet to appropriate fund. And the Fund 300 is the cap. So that's basically just we recommending that the integrity of each project be identified. We understand that the budgets are very detailed on the expense side, but because there's not life-to-date revenue budgets versus expenses compared, and how that difference gets reconciled to fund balance by individual project, that's basically why we are repeating that, and the city is working on that to identify them more. And also, we mentioned taxes receivable as we did in last year as well. And it's not that there is an issue, but the munis tickets that the city put in for IT support, and the city just had a hard time locking it in, like that reconciliations that were done on a quarterly basis. There was a hard time locking them in, the approval signatures on them, because there were some pending items that still had to be resolved. And review and update controls in the social service department, as I mentioned, that is a new comment. Last year was basically really difficult because how do you test a department that had so many waivers and there didn't seem to be any basic requirements in place whatsoever. So this year there were some where a small population of the recipients had to have job qualifications, for example. And we on that small sample that we tested, we did note a few exceptions. So we did want the city to review those internal controls of that department. And then we understand that there's been strain on the department because the transactions are overwhelming and the volume is unusually large of all those departments. Consider an internal audit function. We also recommended it this year. It's a new comment, but we really think that an internal audit function would strengthen the city, especially the city the size of Portland, that there's so many departments with so many transactions going on. It would be beneficial to the city if there was an internal audit function that would be able to do an internal check on controls. And the last item we have in the management letter has to do with the city charter and grant funds at the school. Now, I understand the city charter mentions that the school financial plan has to be presented to city council for all school funds and activities. And I haven't seen where there's an exclusion for grants, and there were significant amount of grants that nobody's ever seen before, as you guys I'm sure are aware, like CARES, ARPA, ESSA, particularly ESSA, last year. But those and Also, something that nobody's seen before is how they could overlap with operating funds right now. For example, there was like a revenue appropriation before in care. And the different basic requirements with these recent grants and how things could change depending on what financial plan you put into it and whether it's up, what's covered on the operating of what's covered in the grant budget. So we wanted to point that out, and because as I mentioned, they didn't see anything that exempted that from going to that city charter requirement. And on the ACRA, I wanted to touch base on your budget. This is just a brief summary of your $374 million revenue amount that you came in and have compared to the budget. It was excess of $15 million. And their over expenditure in expenditure category decreased the net surplus to $13 million. And this is your unassigned funds, which is usually where most look at. And that's important for your rating agencies, and it's important for anyone looking at that ACRA, because general fund, of course, is your main operating fund, and this is the unassigned fund balance. So it's slowly increasing, which is good because your expenditures have been increasing. And if you take that 66 million and compare it to your expenditures, it comes out to around 18.5%. And that is pretty much standard where you want it to be. For example, GFOA recommends that you have 2 out of your 12 months in your unassigned fund balance in general fund, and that comes out to around 17%. So what you have there is close to the recommendation. So it's basically where I would expect it to be. So that's a good sign. This is here just so you could see how much the health and social services expenditures have been growing. It's been growing at an alarming rate. So I just wanted to stress that it's still important for the city to keep cutting costs so it doesn't go out of control. On your debt, this is particularly regarding to general obligation bonds and long-term loans, and this is a comparison of the last 3 years. You could see that the purple business type, that's pretty close. Where it increased more was on the governmental side this year, and there was a new general obligation bond that was issued in May of 22 for $49.4 million. 40.4 million of that was governmental activities, and out of that 40.4 million, 30.9 million related to the schools. So that's in accordance with your CAP plan. Now this slide is going to look really odd, and it's really does not represent anything meaningful. I want to say, because what happens with this net pension liability is Maine First, for example, where your participating local districts members of, because the measurement date is last year, so June 30, 21 was used for June 30, 22 reporting. And what happens is that particular year, the investments exceeded the expectations. So it decreased the liability. And what you'll notice is that your deferred inflows, which all of a sudden are $15 million for pension. So what happens is it comes out of net pension liability and goes into deferred inflows, and the change in expected versus actual investments gets amortized over 5 years. So the reason this slide is odd is because we know that if you were to use current year measurement date, for example, it would have been completely gone the other way. So next year it's going to have a really odd trend when it goes skyrockets up the liability because of the difference in measurement date and reporting year. And this slide is also just so you could see how shockingly the social services expenses are growing over the last 3 years. And I am going to turn this over to you for any questions and comments to share.
Thank you, Ms. Korzak. Are there any questions on the specifics of the report you just presented? If you can put down there we go, so I could see all the attendees. All right. I've read this report. I think I have a working understanding of some of the numbers that were discussed this evening, but I would like to call on both Brendan and Miranda for their perspective on the contents of that report, insofar as some of the policy questions that might arise from those numbers. Brendan?
Sure. I'll just, start by highlighting the fact that I've raised a couple times previously is that, this audit was for the period ending 6/30/22. So a lot of the things that we've discussed in detail at prior committee meetings, we knew would be contained in this report. And we've begun the process of trying to make improvements to correct this, both on the city and the school side. And in the management letter in particular, it has responses from city management and school management to each one of the comments that kind of begin setting the path forward for making corrections. And you heard Alina note on a couple of occasions that she's seen improvement during the fiscal year, and we hope to keep the ship moving in that right direction. Some of the things that are mentioned related to staffing, and we're again working really hard to try and make sure we have full staffing. I know on our side of the house, and the school side is working towards that goal as well. And some of the others were related to the munis conversion and legacy balances in our old system, balances getting carried over into the new system. And I think that, again, that's a shared comment between the city and schools. And you've heard them talk about their payroll conversion. I think that will hopefully represent an improvement down the road as well. Miranda, I don't know if you have anything to add about any of the school stuff.
I mean, I wasn't particularly prepared to speak on this evening. I can, say kind of echo what you're saying, Brendan. I mean, obviously these results are not unexpected, and we've been taking measures and have continued to take measures to improve upon, these findings that we've had for, the last few years, ever since we implemented UNIS payroll. So, it's not, this is a team effort. I manage the budget side of finance, and we have other staff, a controller who had led some of the efforts around our student activity funds and our purchasing. We've added new staff, purchasing manager, to try to deal with some of those issues. And I think we've made some good progress there. But as all of you know, it's no secret we're still struggling with payroll, but we've got I think a really promising plan in place to really change, really change things for the better there with ADP. So I can turn to my other colleagues. I don't know if Terry or Aaron would like to say anything further.
I mean, I agree with what Miranda said. I think we're taking good steps in the right direction. As the auditors mentioned, they arrived in October when things were really challenging for the payroll department. So we were, focused on all of those issues, and that was part of our challenge. But I feel like we've made some steps in the right direction, and we plan to continue to do that. I think ADP is a step in the right direction. We're in the middle of moving towards that now, and we're hoping things will get a lot better.
Any other comments, questions? All right, can we get to number 7 on the management letter, this issue of grant funds, whether or not the decision for expenditures should be public facing. There seems to be some legal question as to whether or not the city has to approve those funds that could be accomplished by the board in a public meeting. Any comments on that?
Good evening again, everybody. This is Aaron. That was, I guess, a significant surprise for us. Just a significant change and departure from any past practice that we've been aware of. So we've reached out to our council for opinion on the matter, and we'll, share that with both committees kind of once we have that. But, as folks know, that certainly has not been, how things have operated for, in anyone's kind of recollection. So, that piece was, as Miranda and others mentioned, those, many of the findings were things we've been working towards, unsurprising, but that was a piece that was new to us and, a change in past practice in our relationship, with city and city council. So we've asked for further opinion on that.
Well, do you know when you're going to get that? Because you talked about that the last time we met.
I don't remember us talking about the finding on this in the management letter, so I would just requested it in the past, couple of days, since we had obtained the management letter.
All right. I think one of the things that we're going to discuss this evening as we move to other parts of the agenda is this idea about what's published in a budget and what's offline, like Title I funds. Those are clearly educational issues and they've been set aside. But as we take a look at the budget, I think there may be questions about how the COVID monies, or ERSIF, if we want to call it that, have been deployed. So this question of how and when the Board of Education should refer certain grant monies to the city is probably going to be central to that conversation moving forward, Aaron and Malia. So as soon as you get an opinion from council, it would be helpful to inform this committee as well as administration. Okay. Emily Figdor, go ahead.
Yeah, just noting that there's lots of grants that we receive that we don't bring before the council and never have. So I just want to be clear that it's not just COVID funding. So this is just completely out of step with our practice.
Thanks for your comment. Mayor?
Thank you, Chair Dion. So I guess consistent with that line of questioning, I'm, less concerned about, Title I and the way things have historically been done. And maybe the part of our focus tonight can be on just the COVID era federal funding. And I think for me, when I think about that, I think that we're all heading into a really difficult FY24 budget. And both the city and the schools have federal COVID era funding to bring to that budget, like we have for the FY22 and FY23 budget. And so I think the use of that limited, kind of COVID specific federal funding maybe is something that we would want to separate from other. I guess what I'm trying to do is move us away from the larger question or the larger 0.7 in the management letter, and maybe have a discussion about how federal funds have been used both on the school side and the city side in our last couple budgets, and how we're looking to use it in FY24. Because I think that for all of us, the loss of funding, COVID era funding heading into FY25 is really going to be the issue. So, or it's going to be a significant issue for all of us. So a question is, with the COVID specific funding that we've all gotten over the last couple of years, I know that hasn't gone in front of the city as it's been used on the school side, but has it had school board approval as part of that budget process? Or I should say, as part of the FY22 and 23 budget process. And I know we've got articulation of that in the FY24 budget process. So I'm sorry that I'm meandering here, but I'm trying to separate, just for the sake of conversation and understanding about how the COVID era funding is affecting both the budget before us in FY24 and then what the loss of it is going to mean in FY25.
Yeah, and Emily, as well, in your experience as chair there. I'm sorry, Mark, if you want us to respond.
No, go ahead, Aaron. It's fine.
Yeah, we had, engagement throughout, the period of our ESSER dollars, in terms of how those expenditures were being used, and did, consistently did reporting, around the use of those dollars, throughout this period of time. So, those things have been brought and had visibility at the school board level. And anyway, we'll get into that some tonight, and we can continue to talk about it here.
Thank you.
I'm trying to manage 3 screens with data and all of you and everything else coming in. So I think we've had comments on the management letter. As I said, for me, one of the issues was the fact as to whether or not there should be a public-facing process for grants. And I was open to a discussion as to whether or not it should occur at the city or in front of the Board of Education. And my grounding for that has been that our process on the municipal side has been pretty intentional, pretty public, and funds were expended for one-time investments that would not generate recurring costs. But that was essential. The only place where there was some repetitive realignment of those funds was in order to minimize or mitigate shortcomings in revenue. And we were really clear as a council that would have a 3-year lifespan. We're now in our first budget trying to deal with that. So when we look at this management letter, that's one of the things we're concerned about, or at least I'm concerned about, is what are we going to do moving forward with our taxes and how federal funds were spent both by ourselves and by your side of the equation. So some clarity there would be helpful. And I mean, in the last cycle for the budget, what to do about COVID monies was a point of discussion. And I'm sure it'll be as we move forward as well. So Superintendent Nally, go ahead.
Thanks, Mark. I just wanted to comment. And again, like Aaron said, we'll talk a little bit about this in our presentation this evening, but and we might have talked a little bit about this with you all last time we were together, but I think when we thought of our ESSER funds, like we said, there was a lot of transparency for the board into what we were spending on, but our first kind of set of money was going toward response. So that was really responding to the health and safety issues, outdoor learning, things like that. But I think what's different for us, and we'll talk about this, is that in the most recent round of funding, it was about recovery, and specifically recovery as it pertains to learning acceleration and the mental and behavioral health impacts. And that is tricky, right? Because that does not recover in 1 to 2 years for our students. That's not the nature of that work. And so that is a tension for us, as we think about, okay, we're not done recovering. We haven't made up for all that lost learning time. We haven't fully addressed the mental and behavioral health impacts on our children in our city. And so what do we do about that when the money goes away? So tonight you'll hear us acknowledge how we're using ESSER this year strategically and how we are looking to seed moves this spring for the long term, with obviously very much aware of the fact that this money is going away. We have other issues coming at us financially, and we fully anticipate that the recovery needs on the learning and mental and behavioral health side will not be complete, by the end of next year. So I just wanted to mention that difference in how we kind of strategically approach that money.
Thank you. Emily, you have the floor.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, I appreciate that context a lot, that of course, when we've done these joint meetings before, we've always, since we've had the COVID federal funding, we have included how we're spending that money as part of our presentations to this committee. So I know you'll remember our past presentation of how we've been spending that money and our strategy around it. While it's not something that this committee, that the city's committee voted on, it was certainly part of the presentations that we made each and every time.
I appreciate that, Emily. I guess I'm trying to clarify, were those decisions made by a vote? I mean, it's become part of the audit report this year. So was there a public vote approving those? I see you nodding yes. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Sometimes I nod when I'm frustrated. It means nothing. So I just want to be sure. Okay. So that because we have different languages. Part of the meeting together is I think we have different cultures and different understandings of what our various roles are between city and school. And I think clarity about what we say and what we mean when we say something is important. So in terms of how we manage grant funds, it probably looks a lot more mechanical, public, and vote driven than some of us may understand what occurs on your side of the table. So that's why some of these questions are coming up. And I think, to be fair, it'd probably be easier if the co-superintendents, if they want to discuss their presentation about the budget, that would be helpful. But I just want to say up front, I mean, I was looking at your notations about monies you were going to use from, I'll call them the COVID monies, because I won't get all the letters right on URSIF. And for me, that raises an issue that I've had conversations with Emily in the past about whether or not it creates a cliff. And if I read the material correctly, it could create a cliff of about $10.4 million for 25-26. And that's fine. That may be your decision as a board, and we'll have to deal with that on the council side. But if that is the case, some of us may appreciate some clarity about how you're going to address that hole. So I'm seeing what we're dealing with the limited deficiency we have in the budget from our spending of COVID money, but I'm seeing possibly a much more significant equation to confront on your side. And I could be all wrong. God, there are days I am all wrong. So I'll be happy to hear an explanation, and maybe it will be educated. It may present some education to the rest of the members of the city council as well. So thank you. Malia?
Yeah, Sarah, we went at the same time. Did you want to jump in first, or I'm happy to?
Oh, I just wanted to say, I think a lot of the questions and things that you're bringing up, Mark, are really going to be part of the presentation that you're hearing tonight. And just, from working alongside the superintendents and so many other leaders in the district, everything you're naming right now has been under deep and critical consideration for months, and both thinking like long-term, or like backwards and forwards and in the present moment together. And so really just wanting to, just as the city is really trying to figure out how to manage the cliff that you're in, we are also doing the same way in a very multi-layered and complex process. So I just wanted to make sure that people are aware that all the things that you're mentioning are things that we're thinking about and are being prepared to respond to. Go ahead, Maria.
I don't know. I was going to say something of the same sort, that Mark, affirming that you are correct, that we are looking at a cliff, that we're aware of that it's not only SRF driven, which we'll talk about when we go through our presentation. And we will also illuminate some of the structural changes that we're having to contemplate as a result of SRF, but also of other issues that are going to hit our budget next year. And so that's built into the conversation we wanted to have with you all this evening. It's more looking to the future, but we anticipated you'd have questions about our strategy this year. And so that's why we built in a little bit of transparency into how we're looking toward the future, because we assumed that would be an obvious question. So, because it's the right one to be asking.
I'll turn it over to the mayor.
Thank you for that. And I don't mean to delay us, but I just thought I'd ask a kind of mechanical administrative question, either to our auditor or to finance folks on the school side or the city side. So I'm looking at the management letter, and in the event that there's disagreement about this seventh finding, and we just live with disagreement. How does that get resolved so that it doesn't become an issue moving forward? Again, kind of a mechanical issue with regard to how we resolve issues within the audit. My understanding is that usually we come up with strategies to say, well, here's how we'll address this concern. How do we do that if there's a legitimate just disagreement and we need to move on from that?
Here, would you like me to address?
Sure, yes, please. If you can address that, that would be helpful.
So it wouldn't be the auditors resolving this for you. It's strictly between the city and the school. And it looks like you already have your council involved in it. So the decision you come up with is the decision we'll take and we'll carry forward. So it's not going to reappear next year.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Any other comment on that before I move forward? All right, seeing none, I guess it'd be an opportune time to defer to the co-superintendents for their presentation on their proposed budget.
Thank you, Counselor Dion. Good evening, everyone, once again. So I'm here with Aaron, co-interim superintendent, and our budget director, Miranda Fasulo, to step you through this evening. With that being said, we wanted to share, and just for transparency, our chair and finance chair are aware of this, but the rest of our board is hearing this from us right this moment. But literally moments ago, before we came into this meeting, we got an update from the state pertaining to our funding, and essentially the mill rate across the state dropped due to an error at the state level. And so it's good news. It's resulting in a $3.6 million shift in terms of what we were previously expecting. So we contemplated, what do we do? We're stepping into this meeting. We have had zero time to process this information and incorporate it. We felt like, our whole orientation throughout our process has been to be as transparent with our board and community as we could be. So even though we don't feel like we have our heads wrapped around it, we felt it was important that we said it to you all. And then we weren't sure if our presentation as it stands would be useful, since it obviously this changes the picture for us. Our recommendation is that it might still be useful for us to step you through what we had planned, just to give you the context, because while some things will change, a lot of the context that we're going to be talking to is going to still be relevant. So that would be our recommendation, but caveating the whole thing with this new information that will shift things. But before we move forward, we wanted to pause and see if that made sense to you all. Our thinking is that we could share what we've been talking with our board about, but then come back next Thursday. I think we have a joint meeting again, and then bring sort of updated information incorporating this very late breaking positive news, but news we still haven't really been able to think through, back to the two committees. So I don't know, Councilor Dion, if you want to respond or react to that as far as taking our recommendation to still proceed, or if you're having a different reaction to that given this new information.
I think the new information is very welcome.
Yes.
God almighty, good news. When does it happen? I need to make a note of this. All right, so I think it's great. I think I would welcome, and I'm sure the rest of the attendees would welcome, an overview of the budget so we can see where you were at a certain point in time, with a big asterisk saying this could all be changed once you engage in a calculation with your own staff about what the good news could mean. So yeah, I think that's fair. And then you could give us an update on that. So okay, it's a helpful lens, at least, to evaluate the quality of that good news moving forward.
Yeah.
Before we,
that was our take too. Oh, sorry, Mark, but yeah, so we'd be happy to do that. Were you just going to call on Sarah before I jump in?
Yeah, I was going to honor her hand for a moment. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you. I was just going to, not to be a wet blanket, but I would just want to underscore the fact that while this is good news, it's not good news to the extent that it would meet all of the needs of the district. And I would just sort of ask folks to keep in mind that, as Superintendent Nally was referring to, we haven't really had a chance to digest and internalize the information. And my gosh, it would have been great to get this information sooner, but I fully support the path forward that she outlined.
Thank you, Sarah. I get excited about good news, but it's very guarded. I just don't try to communicate that physically. I mean, I try to be positive, but I know it's not a magic bullet that's coming to us, but at least it's some manner of relief to some of the tension that you've probably confronted in building this budget. So that I'm excited for. Any kind of relief when you're drowning is good. Thank you. I'll turn it over to the co-superintendent.
Yeah, well put, Mark. Thank you for that. Great. So I will kick us off. Erin, I think you're going to share slides. And you can move to the next one. So our plan this evening is to start by providing some context around the budget pressures we're facing, and then to look at the priorities we're aiming to center and the strategy we're using to responsibly serve our students while managing the cost implications for the taxpayers. So I'll do that piece. Then Miranda's going to step you through the financial overview of what we proposed. And then finally, Erin's going to tie it together with a synthesis overview of what we're investing and what we're reducing. And we'll give some transparency into some of the needs we did not advance in this budget, as well as talk briefly to that FY25 outlook and how we're thinking about starting to manage toward that. So our budget theme this year is really about shoring up what we consider the core services we provide. So namely academics, behavioral health, and the operational systems that enable us to run effective schools that are supportive of our diverse and talented employees. And for context in developing the priorities advanced in this budget, we took in feedback from a lot of stakeholders across our system, including direct engagement with our school and department leaders, reviewing priorities that emerged from the extensive engagements across our community when it was pertaining to what people want from the next superintendent, pulling from themes that came out of listening sessions the board did with staff, and then just, hundreds of conversations and emails like I know you all do and the city manager does. So, as far as context setting, I think the first thing we wanted to talk about is just the budget pressures we're facing. Again, we've talked about some of these with you, and many of these we share together. But first of all, we're facing a sizable increase to our rollover budget based on increases to salaries, and this is per our negotiated contracts, as well as from the impact of inflation and the cost of our debt service. Then, as you well know, our operational enablers, such as payroll, have been exposed for their gaps, and we can no longer limp along with underinvesting in those core functions. So that's putting pressure on the budget. Also, that we're welcoming an unprecedented number of new students during the year, the vast majority of whom are multilingual learners needing intensive English language development services, and who are enrolling in large groups. I think about 50 to 75 per month we are tracking through our intake department. We are also seeing a very sizable increase to our costs for out-of-district special education services for a small number of students, and we're required to provide those services. And then this is the thing that is now changing, or that we're caveating, but we're also have been planning around a loss in state funding, as well as a loss in other grant funding. So a caveat to that piece, but that was part of what we've been looking at as we developed what we recommended to the school board. So given the budget pressures and our commitments to our long-term strategy, we've established the following budget priorities you can see here. So first, we strongly believe that we must maintain our commitment to the Portland Promise goals and strategies. And despite the multitude of pressures, want to avoid going backwards in terms of the systemic work that's underway to increase academic opportunities for students, increase the safety and inclusiveness of our school communities, ensure professional learning culture, diversifying our team, and disrupting inequitable systems and practices that are creating disproportionate outcomes based on race, income, language, and disability. Second, we need to be responsive to our context, which means adjusting to our resources to the hundreds of new students we have and continue to welcome into our school communities. And we really need to set our educators up for success by ensuring they have the right support to help them create that sense of belonging for our students while differentiating for a really huge range of needs in our classrooms. And then finally, we just simply must put resources back into some of the district operational functions to ensure we're running an efficient and effective organization. So those are our priorities. So then when we put all that together with dollar figures, you can see here that the total baseline rollover cost increase is $7.7 million, and that's about a 6% increase over last year's budget. And the drivers of that increase are salaries, debt service, and then the other category is largely inflation related. And then on top of that, what we've been working with is here this loss of $2.4 million in state subsidy, which of course we're going to be updating. And so with those figures, and without making any new investments, we would be looking at a tax rate increase of 8.7%. And then if you add in the proposed investments in response to the budget pressures and aligned to the priorities, we'd need to be adding another $7.1 million, which combined with the rollover budget would result in a tax rate increase of 15.5%. So this is what we've been talking with our board about. So we understand that a 15.5% tax rate increase on the school side is not tenable for our taxpayers. And so we've been approaching this budget with an awareness that we need to find ways to cut back from what we believe is needed and to make hard choices about what we are and are not advancing in this budget. And so in order to do this, we're taking the following approach. First, the budget aims to preserve core programming aligned to our priorities and really minimizes any new investments. Second, we're leveraging reserves while also being cognizant of a multi-year strategy for how we're going to spend down reserves over time, given the future budget forecast is even more challenging for us. And then third, and this is, where a lot of those questions we are hearing are coming from, is that we are going to lean on the remaining ESSER funds that are available to us while we have them, including moving some of our local investments over into the grant, in order to hang on to them for another year. And then despite those strategies, we're also making reductions to our local budget, and we're cutting investments in our ESSER grant that we had intended to carry for one more year in order to make space for some of that essential FTE and non-salary investment that's currently in the local. And as we contemplated where to make reductions, we aim to spread those out across departments and priority areas to try to avoid any significant loss to programming, which we were not entirely able to do, as you'll see in terms of what we had put forward. And then we're, as we were just talking about with you all, we've been highlighting for the board and the community that we're going to have to engage in difficult conversations about initiating larger structural changes for the future, most of which will require that we start engaging with the community this spring. So we aren't surprising anyone with large, unexpected changes to how we organize schooling in Portland in the future. And at the same time, we need to continue the collaborative work with you all and with legislators to activate advocacy at the state level to see if there's any movement we can get there to make adjustments to the school funding formulas for our context so that we don't have to keep cutting away from schools. So it's a little bit of context setting for you all with the caveat in there. And I'm going to pass it to Miranda, who's now going to step through some of the financial specifics.
Thank you, Malia. So I'm going to begin with a high-level overview of the proposed local budget, and then, with ESSER funding really being an integral part of the total budget for the coming year, I'll also provide a little background on our pandemic-related funding to date and a summary of what is proposed to be funded by ESSER in FY24. The superintendent's FY24 recommended budget is a budget of $141.3 million, which represents an increase of 6.1% over the current year budget and an increase of $8.2 million. With regard to tax impact, this budget requires a 7% increase to the school tax rate. And here are some of the specifics behind those key figures. This slide compares the proposed FY24 budget to this year's FY23 budget with increase amounts and percentages on the right shaded in gray. You can see that the proposed budget increase is driven by an increase in salaries and benefits, but also by notable increases in debt service and in non-salary expenses. On the revenue side, we have been seeing a substantial reduction to non-tax funding resources, which just more than offset by strategic leveraging of several different reserve fund balances. But unfortunately, with limited revenue options otherwise, we're left with property tax levy increasing by just about the proposed overall budget increase, or at least that's where we were until about 5:45 this evening. So what I'm going to do next is go through the primary drivers of the changes to our local budget, first on the expense side and then on the revenue side. But before I do, I just want to be clear that my aim in these next few slides is really to provide the overarching framework to be able to understand what's driving the financials of this local budget proposal. In places where I refer to investments, those investments will be categorized in the priority areas described earlier by Superintendent Nally, and there will be more detail on what those investments include coming after I conclude the financial overview. So with that in mind, there are really 4 key areas to cover in terms of how we've arrived at this budget proposal from an expenditure perspective. And that's our baseline increases. So essentially the cost to do next year what we're doing already this year. Investments in addition. So that's really programming that's materially different from this year. Reductions to our local budget, and finally, things that have that we presently have in our local budget that we're proposing to shift to ESSER funding for next year. So starting with baseline increases, with cost increases related to our bargaining contracts and benefits costs, taking into account known turnover and retirements, we landed at about a $4.1 million increase for next year. Our debt service, driven by BFOF school building projects, has increased by $2.2 million. We also have just under $400,000 budgeted for school buses in our baseline budget. And the reason that they're in our baseline budget is because these buses have state approvals with state funding that is also reflected in our FY24 state subsidy. And that's rolled into our baseline budget as well. So I wanted to account for both the revenue and the expense side of that purchase in the same place. We also have other increases that fall under transportation, most notably the cost of our crossing guard contract, as well as fuel costs. And we're also seeing increases for certain utilities, insurance, maintenance and use fees, and food services costs. The local budget also includes $3.8 million in additions or investments. So by priority area, we have about $150,000 in the Portland Promise, $175,000 to support multilingual learners, $590,000 in operations, and almost $2.9 million in core services. So there will be more detail on each of these in a future section, but I do want to preview here for clarity that core services includes about $2 million for special education out of district tuition and transportation, and another $400,000 for 3 additional school buses. So that's 6 total buses, 3 in the baseline and 3 additional reflected here as an investment. And the difference between these bus purchases is that while all of the buses have been approved by the state, this second round is designated in a later funding year, which means we won't receive state funding for these particular 3 buses until FY25. So it's a bit of a different strategic decision point. So I just wanted to distinguish that purchase in that way. Moving on to reductions, this budget proposes the elimination of 3.4 community coordinator positions. That says 3.8 there. It was meant to say 3.38, so that's a typo. It's 3.4 community coordinator positions and 1.5 mentoring coordinator roles. It also calls for a 5% reduction to non-salary department and school budgets across the board and made reductions to what will be funded in terms of cell phones across the district. So as previewed earlier by Malia in the presentation, this budget also proposes shifting about $2.6 million in costs currently funded by the local budget to ESSER funding. So this shift is really intended to maximize the use of our ESSER funding to preserve elements of our local programming critical to academic recovery and progress. And this goes hand in hand with the need over the coming year to pursue structural changes that can enable this programming to move back to local funding once ESSER funding concludes next year. The areas identified to shift to ESSER funding are 9 math coaches, 7 elementary school teachers intended to preserve our ability to maintain current class sizes, 9.5 high school teachers representative of the numbers driven by our equity enhancement staffing ratios, and 5 student enrichment coordinator positions presently funded by local. Additionally, we're able to make a small reduction to our local sub budget as we propose to continue to fund dedicated subs on ESSER funds for next year. So moving on to the revenue side of our budget, again, with the giant caveat, until this evening, we thought we had a reduction of $2.4 million to our state subsidy this year. That is driven by our rapidly rising property tax valuation as calculated by the state annually. And this happens because the state's funding formula requires communities with high valuation to contribute more to its cost of education than communities with lower valuations. Portland's rapidly increasing valuation has been and will continue to be a challenge in the coming years, and it unfortunately, as you all well know, has a similar impact on city municipal funding. On the brighter side, the state does partially reimburse districts for high-cost out-of-district special ed placements when costs end up in excess of what is initially allocated through the subsidy. And based on our FY24 cost projections, we're projecting a corresponding revenue offset to our increased tuition costs of about $500,000. We're also seeing slight upticks in each of local, food, and adult ed revenue that help offset some of the previously thought state funding loss. And we're looking to responsibly leverage some of our existing reserves toward debt service and toward one-time purchases, specifically the one set of buses that will be reimbursed by the state in FY25, along with an IT device purchase. But nevertheless, as previously noted, that still leaves about $8 million to be borne by local property tax. So in terms of what this budget would mean to the local taxpayer, the budget proposal increases the local tax rate by 50 cents, representing an increase to the school tax rate of 7%. For a home valued at $375,000, that would mean a property tax increase of about $187 a year, or about $16 a month. So finally, I'd just like to shift gears a bit to address our pandemic-related funding. Before I summarize the proposed plan for the use of remaining funds in FY24, I just want to step back for a moment and recap our total funding to date. All in all, we've received just under $42 million in funding since the start of the pandemic. Two acronyms that may or may not be familiar related to this are CRF and ESSERF, with CRF being early on, and that's over and done with, and ESSERF coming to us in 3 installments. One installment of ESSERF is over, another is ending this year, and the last, ESSERF 3, ends next year and is where we are projecting to have about $7.8 million in funds remaining and available for use in FY24. So we've really had 2 primary types of investments with this funding, as Malia spoke to earlier. They're characterized here as response investments and recovery investments. So response efforts were those more early on when we were focused on health and safety, facilities adaptations, and enabling remote education. Our investments, and along with the funding requirements, have since shifted towards academic recovery, with investments such as summer school, social emotional supports, and a wide range of other academic supports, particularly for those students most affected by pandemic learning loss. And so to close my section here, this is just a high-level snapshot of the proposed plan for ESSERF in FY24. We have the staff position shifted from local, along with investments in each of the previously named priority areas. And with that, I will turn it over to Superintendent Townsend to review in more programmatic detail what's in both the local budget and in the ESSERF budget in each of these investment priority areas.
Thank you, Miranda. Great. Complete. Go ahead, Aaron.
Yeah. So good evening, everybody. So to conclude our presentation tonight, I'll sum up kind of the overarching investments by priority in local and ESSERF, since we are kind of trying to approach this budget holistically. Excuse me. So on this slide, you can see the limited local budget investment we are proposing for this year related to our broader strategic plan, the Portland Promise. This is consistent with the budget strategy that Malia named earlier about minimizing our new investments. The pre-K positions are for one expansion class that are essentially a net neutral, since we do receive revenue for expanding into another class. And the only other addition to our local budget for our Portland Promise investments is the added funds to enable stipended teacher leadership roles at all 3 grade spans, which is connected to an agreement in our negotiated contract with our educators union. We continue to leverage our ESSER resources in the final year to respond to the student needs from the pandemic. You can see the investments tied to the mental and behavioral health needs of our students, such as social workers and counselors, positions at the middle school aimed at uplifting student voice, such as the Make It Happen coordinators, and a handful of academic investments, such as the one teacher on full release who oversees our literacy curriculum and instruction. We retained the summer school investments, but in this version of our budget had significantly reduced them from 3.2 million to 900,000. Additionally, there are several new critical investments in our SRF grant, most of which do not require significant recurring costs, including investments in our literacy curriculum, K-8, including the foundational skills program, and for K-2 and literacy curriculum for all grades K-8, curriculum for SLIFE programming. So SLIFE stands for Students with Limited and Interrupted Formal Education, which is the profile of many of our newly arrived students. Curriculum for social emotional learning at the secondary level to continue to respond proactively to the mental and behavioral health needs of our students. And as mentioned earlier, the additional 9.5 FTE from the equity enhancement for our high schools. So as you can see there, our local investment is quite minimal, but we're leveraging our ESSER for investment, to respond to the learning acceleration needs and mental and behavioral health needs. But here, we wanted to bring visibility into many of the requests that we are not able to bring forward into the proposed budget, as well as some cuts we've made from ESSER in order to make space for those local investments that we needed to put into ESSER to avoid even deeper cuts. I won't read through all of these, but you can see there are a handful of requests intended to promote learning acceleration, such as curriculum materials in science and health, coaching supports for pre-K and Wabanaki studies, and other school-based requests. In addition, you see other requests proposed to add more to our mental and behavioral health supports and to staff of development that we're not able to advance at this time. We're also making several cuts from the SRF grant, including 2 board-certified behavior analyst positions that went unfilled this year, and approximately $300K in contractual services related to our social emotional learning and restorative practices work, our 5 living schoolyard teachers, several stipends, and an ed tech that is not needed moving forward, based on our ratios for staffing. So I do want to highlight just for a moment the removal of the living schoolyard teachers from ESSER is a cut that will impact programming. We've tried to minimize that, but was not entirely unavoidable. So these positions were the result of the innovation that was sparked by the pandemic and designed to deepen our experiential and outdoor learning model and to align to our science vision as we prepare our students to be environmentally literate. So that team has done awesome work, and we're currently being studied by other districts and states that are wanting to follow our lead in this work. So while these teachers have done an amazing job, moving forward, we aim to integrate this work into the experiential learning aspect of our core curriculum. In terms of multilingual learners, here you see the total picture of our investments on the school side aligned to the receiving of many new students. Know that that's a significant challenge on the city side as well. So the local additions are tied in part to our intake center, which has been stretched beyond capacity this year and trying to keep up with our enrolling students on an ongoing basis. In addition, we're adding a multilingual case manager position. This person will work year-round and support families with accessing resources in the community as they transition into Portland. Additionally, we're using some ESSER funds to add teachers per the ratio-based methodology we use for providing appropriate levels of English language instruction. And the remaining ESSER roles are positions we have now that we want to carry forward to in FY24 to continue to serve these multilingual learners. As for the requests not being advanced, these were, of course, difficult choices in the context of needs for supports for our newest students and newest Mainers. However, in the broader budget context and awareness of our various priorities, we believe the investments we're making here will provide significant additional capacity to relieve some of the challenges we're currently experiencing by the spike in new enrollments. In terms of operations, this slide summarizes our investments to address those operational needs that you're aware of, right? And certainly related to the beginning presentation about the audit. So we've prioritized resources for payroll, finance, and HR to address the payroll issues that have surfaced this past year and the audit findings from our combined city and school audit. These investments include our contract with ADP to work with a dedicated payroll provider and eliminate some of the technological systems that have plagued us, increases in our HR positions to take on additional roles related to employee processing, specifically, some of the segregation of duties that were identified in the audit findings, and redistribute some of those responsibilities from our payroll staff to relieve the burden on them. And then finally adding finance team staff to ensure we have capacity to continue to maintain some of the progress that we referenced that we've made this year in response to prior audit findings. So we're also increasing the number of custodians by a little bit to address some of the increase in square footage from the progress on our BFOF projects, and maintaining some investments in our website manager to continue to improve our communication and engagement with our community. And as Miranda mentioned, maintaining the dedicated subs currently as we move into next year. These are full-time on-site substitutes that have been really critical in the course of the pandemic to address, the increased staff absence rates and shortage of daily substitutes. Again, many things that we weren't able to advance, from IT, food service, and additional facilities staffing needs that just unable to meet at this time.
Aaron?
Yep.
Okay, now I was just going to tell you a slide. I could only see half of it. And I didn't know if I was the only one suffering from that. I just wanted to bring it to your attention. That's all.
Okay. Yep. Thanks, Mark. And getting towards the end here, just a couple more slides. So the last one around just our investment detail around core services. The most significant thing as we've named is the increase in our out-of-district special education costs. In general, we serve over 99% of our students within the district, but there's some whose needs we're not able to meet in our district specialized program. So we have a small number of kind of high-cost placements that are required per student's IEPs, the individual education plans that we're obligated to meet and provide. So, that's driving much of that increase. And we anticipate, as Miranda mentioned, receiving some additional revenue next spring through the state adjustment that she discussed. But there are a few other additions to our budget here in terms of core service, including the reintroduction of the debt service for our central office building, the bus purchases that have been mentioned, replenishment of kind of student and staff devices, and a few kind of ratio-based staffing adds. And of course, many other things that we're not able to advance at this time. Here kind of called out are some of the reductions in terms of the elimination of our community coordinator positions. These staff serve generally multiple school sites and do amazing work coordinating important support such as clothing and food resources for our students and families, as well as managing volunteer activities. Additionally, we are eliminating the 2.75 mentoring coordinators, one at Portland and one at Deering. These have been vacant for most of the past year. And unfortunately, as we've needed to prioritize our core programming and the funding of our academic and social emotional learning roles, these were ones that we aren't able to maintain, or we had proposed to not maintain going into next year. So these, the loss of incredible staff like this is emblematic of the difficult challenges ahead of us in the, budget process in the coming years. So last, as a summary, this slide shows the net staffing impacts of our initial proposed budget for FY24. As you can see.
Aaron, I have to interrupt. We're not getting, at least, all right, now we're getting the full slide. Something happens where we only get half a slide, but it's all right now. Thank you.
Maybe I'll try. Yeah. So anyway, we're establishing a total of 15.5 positions, but to accomplish this, we're eliminating over 18 FTE of existing positions so that we can deliver a budget, that addresses our priorities, but is mindful of our impact on local taxpayers. The last couple slides is just a very brief view into the FY25 outlook, because as we said, that's an important kind of context for us in terms of our decision making for now. So as we're all experiencing, we anticipate continued challenges with our state funding due to the rising valuations. So in very preliminary projections, again, we'll need to revisit based on the news we got just prior to the meeting, but we had been anticipating a further reduction of potentially over $5 million next year. So, and as FY24 5 will be as this coming year, FY24 is our final year of federal pandemic relief dollars, we'll be experiencing the loss of that revenue going into FY25. So with the annual increases to our rollover costs and increases to our debt service, due to the renovation of our elementary schools, we were projecting as much as a $21 million gap. So this is kind of connected to your comments earlier, Mark, a significant potential challenge ahead of us between our revenue and existing expenditures for FY25. So this will require some very challenging decisions about how we operate and organize our schools. This looming fiscal cliff has been a key part of our planning for this year's budget. We've established a debt service reserve strategy to mitigate the impacts of these increases both this year and in following years. And we also believe that with the additional resources of ESSERF, that our most prudent strategy is not to propose significant local cuts in our budget this year. We've moved over 2.5 in local budget resources to ESSERF, but additional significant reductions to our local budget will not help us address the fiscal challenges, for next year, because once those reductions have been made, they're gone and we're not able to address the revenue. So, it would significantly reduce our flexibility in future years to manage the potential impacts, if we're, really making significant reductions this year. But that being said, we've begun to kind of revisit many structural moves to account for the potential challenges in FY20. So given that our budget is primarily staffing, we've revisiting many ideas that have been out there in prior difficult budget times to be able to make the kinds of reductions necessary to address, our revenue losses next year. So many of these items will be on the list are familiar to many of you, especially those recently on the school board, including questions about elementary reconfiguration and class size, investments in our middle school model, just to name a few of the things. So all of these potential structural moves are very complex and will require significant community engagement and planning. So that's why we're beginning this conversation now, even as we move through the FY24 budget. So, and given the scale of the potential gap next year, it's going to take multiple of these strategies to achieve a budget that is realistic for our community. So as we move forward from our FY24 budget process, we'll spend more time this spring on these strategies to be prepared for FY25 and kind of that looming fiscal cliff that we've been talking about. So finally, we just had the last couple slides just to remind the community and public of kind of our next steps in terms of engagement. So we're here at the March 28th joint board meeting. Next week, we have a school board finance committee meeting immediately following this tonight. And then next week, we anticipate at this moment kind of the first, an additional public hearing and first review, by our full board before we're back together for a joint meeting next Thursday, with anticipating our school board approving our budget on April 11th, which will then move everything, to the city council for the following month as we move through and engage with you all with a tentative date of May 15th in terms of a proposed city council vote. And as we all know, then the public referendum on June 13th. So with that, we'll kind of close the presentation here. And again, obviously, this context that was the proposed budget and everything we've been working on since January that kind of got, upended a little bit here just prior to our meeting. So we look forward to engaging with our committee this evening, later tonight, and ongoing with the board to account for those changes and then to be prepared to continue to engage with you all at our joint committee meeting next Thursday in terms of where we stand.
You always cover a lot of ground, Aaron. Malia did a good job, but you always cover a lot of ground. I appreciate it. Some of your slides just didn't work. They kind of fell off or something, just in case you use it in another venue.
Okay.
Are there any questions from any of the attendees or committee members? Councilor Chavarro?
Thank you, Chair. Really great presentation. It was very, very clear. You guys always do a great job at breaking it down to kind of layman's terms. So I appreciate that. So on the funds that are moving, the 2.5 a little over 2.5 million that are moving over to ESSERF. I think, I know you talked about that will kind of create a cliff. Do you have a sense of how big of a cliff? I mean, I know that maybe some of that's to recovery already, and so maybe it's going to go away, but or is it all going to have to find money to replace it?
I can start with that. Hi, Anna. It's nice to see you. Yeah, so we had started to try to create a projection for that, but then felt like it was a little bit premature to get too specific. I mean, there are certain FTEs within that, and then there's some non-FTE or non-salaried dollars. An example of an initial assumption is that we have some curriculum dollars in there that's related to learning acceleration, for example. So that in theory is a one-time cost, right? So we're trying to figure out what are those one-time costs that we won't anticipate having to pull over. It just requires a little bit further analysis because, you know, something like curriculum, you don't just buy it once and it's all the way done, right? You have new kids coming, so there's portions of the cost. So essentially there are some elements in there. We were trying to be strategic about things that could be one time only or would be, you know, significantly reduced in future years. But we don't yet have the specific number of what we would ideally want to carry forward versus what we would just right out of the gate anticipate rolling off. We don't think we'd have to carry it all forward, but in that look that Aaron showed you, we just put it all in there because that's kind of our worst case look, that $20 million gap. But it won't be the case that all of it has to go forward.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just, you know, $2.5 million is a big gap to cover for both of our budgets, but I know that you have that on your radar. I mean, looking at the presentation, it's very reasonable. All of the new investments, or the vast majority of them, seem to be responsive to kind of changing demographics and changing needs in the district, and make a lot of sense. And then, of course, the emphasis on operations, which is appreciated. So I don't think I have a ton of questions. I think, you know, we'll go through the process and see kind of where our budget is and where your updated budget comes in, and continue the conversation. But thank you. I really appreciate this presentation tonight. It's good to see you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Counselor. I was going to say thank her, of course. Any other comments?
Counselor Diane, I just wanted to say that Counselor Zaro texted me, and he, I guess, is just in a cab right now about to get on a plane, so he may not still be with us. And just to let you know that.
I appreciate it. He texted me as well, so I told him I appreciated his diligence, but he is allowed to go from the hotel to the airport uninterrupted. But he might reconnect. Who knows? Mayor?
Thank you. And thank you very much, Aaron and Malia. What a thorough presentation. Really appreciate all the information that you shared. I just have a quick clarifying question. It's in the it's in the letter that accompanies the budget materials that were in our packet. And I think you covered it in your presentation. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this. It's on, let me tell you. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's on page 6 of the initial communication, and it's in the middle of the page, and it says to further cope with our fiscal pressures, and then we've got some bullets. So again, I think you covered this, Aaron, but I want to make sure I'm following you correctly. You talked about using the $7.8 million in remaining ESSERF funds for ongoing student recovery needs. So I followed that, but then the bullet right beneath it says moving $2.6 million in locally funded investments that are aligned with recovery goals. Is that 2.6 part of the 7.8 right above it?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you, Mayor. I was going to ask the same question because that, in my earlier comments, I was reading that as 10 million plus. My reaction to the budget is I appreciated the detail of the presentation. I'm pleased to see there's an intentional investment in what I call business operations for the district. I think we all can agree that's important. I acknowledge and respect your efforts insofar as dealing with the reality of a new student population that has come to us from places that they tried to escape, and we need to do something in their best interest. So those parts of the budget I'm okay with. So I'm going to circle back to something that Malia said. In terms of cliff management, I looked at the list that Aaron presented at the end of his budget of you call them structural changes that might reduce money. But I remain concerned about how a cliff might occur. And Malia, you kind of addressed it and said you were teasing out pieces of activities that some are recurring, some might not be. I think in the future, having a better sense of that may help us on the city council side better evaluate the challenges posed by your budget construction. Do you follow what I'm trying to ask for?
I think so. I mean, can I just repeat back, Mark, just in terms of what I'm hearing? I think, I think contextually, 80% of our budget is people. And I don't know if you all are similar in that regard. And so that's just a reality. And so, when we have people on that, that's a concern in terms of funding cliff, unless we're going to be cutting people. I think from our perspective, we have that money this year. And so we want to use it while we can to give ourselves time to prepare and plan for these larger structural moves. So we are aware that we'll have to be cutting a bunch unless we can figure out some of these structural things. And we're buying ourselves a year to figure out how to start to plan for that. But yes, in future, in the next conversation, the other thing I'm hearing is, can you all better understand that question about, well, what wouldn't have to carry over in an ideal world? And, what are some of those non-salary one-time costs? Or maybe there's some FTE one-time costs. And we can provide a little bit more clarity on that.
I think that would be helpful. I saw in the attendees that Counselor Rodriguez was here. Has he dropped off?
Counselor Diane, Counselor Rodriguez just texted me. He's going through airport security, and so he's not going to be on. I'm sure that he would be very happy.
He's right in front of me. He was on the call all the way to the end, but yes, he just got off because we're getting up through the security line.
I'm sure he would be happy to contribute to this conversation and happy to see everybody, but they're all flying back from DC. So,
all right. The reason I was asking for him, and I'll take the liberty to paraphrase him, is that a successful city requires a successful school system. And that he would be taking that particular lens to look at the budget proposals. And I think in fairness, his commentary impressed me, and I just want to give him credit for that observation because it'll help inform some of the members of the council as we move forward. Mayor?
Oh, thanks, Chair Diane. So I'm thinking about something, Malia, that you said early on, which is the recovery doesn't happen within the time frame of federal funding that is limited. And I hear you on that front. And I'm wondering, I'm going to make an analogy to the city side, but I'm wondering if there's any word from the federal government that funding for continued support for students is being considered by Congress or the White House. I hear you on that front. And the analogy I'm going to make to the city side is that in our FY23 budget, we got one-time funding from the state in acknowledgement of the shortfall within the general assistance program to the city of Portland because of the increased numbers of people that we were accommodating by providing emergency shelter. And so that's something that we're really looking at right now is that loss of one-time funding, but actually our need has gotten greater on that same front. And so when it comes to students and recovery and support, It's terrible to have this, limited time funding fall away. And, is there anything that you see on the horizon from the federal government that acknowledges that?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, we're not aware of any, conversations on the federal, on the federal side. I mean, I think as many folks may be aware, the level of investment, that kind of came out of this, is dwarfs, in many ways, kind of what the typical federal role is in terms of supporting schools. So no, there isn't anything, but certainly ears open and, kind of active on that side. I'll, use this as well. Didn't highlight this, but certainly engaged at the state level as well, just on the revenue side, while we anticipate, challenges, even outside of ESSERF, right? Even if ESSERF, the ESSERF, sunsetting of the last ESSERF dollars wasn't on the table for us, because of, inflation, all the various cost pressures, the EPS challenges with valuation, right? We'd be anticipating a challenging financial situation regardless. So I know we've been collaborating on that, but just to make that visible, that at the state level, so advocacy at the state level, as well as trying to, be aware of any potential, but we have not, I'm not aware of anything at the federal level, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. And I actually, Chair Dinah, I'm just going to jump back in and acknowledge what Aaron just said. I think that we've had some really great legislative committee meetings with Amelia and Aaron, and both Sarah's in attendance. So thank you for attending those meetings and working with us collaboratively on some of the issues that we're facing at the state level. Danielle and I were up in Augusta last Tuesday, and we're going to head up again this Thursday. So anything that we can do to be helpful on that front, because I know there's a few things up there that could potentially have the potential to be helpful to the schools. Happy to talk with you before Thursday if there's any updates on that front, so that we can do some follow up there.
Oops.
Go ahead, Malia.
Yeah, appreciate that, Mayor. And I think we did put some language out there for folks. I don't know if you had that, but if not, we'll make sure you have that. And also, we've followed up with the commissioner on some of what we were hearing from some legislators around, for example, being able to re-up our enrollment count, which turns out is not real yet, but it's on the table. So there are a few of those things that would be super beneficial. So we'll make sure that we are aligned. When did you say you're going up again?
Thursday.
Thursday this week.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments from the attendees? Such a large group and not very talkative. Something's wrong. Right? Okay, this is where I get to read some long documents just so that we can close out the half hour. No, I'm just kidding. Look, I appreciate everybody attending. I'm always impressed by the detail. It's helpful. I think I want to compliment your staff that's put this together. It doesn't happen. I also want to acknowledge that I've appreciated meeting with board member Bryden, and we've talked informally and tried to collaborate on the realities that we're both facing in our budgets, as have Chair Lentz and the mayor. So I think we're making some progress. I'll repeat, our concern is not to evaluate each line in the budget. That's the purview of the Board of Education. I think the concerns that some of us have had is the nature of the relationship of the board's budget to federal funding and what consequence that could mean to a future mutual tax levy that we bring forward. So with that, unless there's any other business to be conducted by this joint committee, I'm going to call for a motion. But before I do, I was looking for Corporation Counsel, but I'm going to make a request of Corporation Counsel that they reach out and speak to the school's attorneys so we can get a report on item 7. I don't want that to fester. I want to get some clarity about who approves what and how when it comes to federal funding. Our concern is not Title I monies. Those have always been in the purview of the Board of Education. I'm not sure the council has any standing there. But I think the lawyers should discuss it and come back to both our bodies with the final opinion or a process about how to move forward to resolve the question. So with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I think it's just the two of you left as committee members.
I know, it's like Survivor. We're in it. We're the last two. So I'm going to second her motion. I have to call a roll, as silly as it is for the two of us. How do you vote, Anna?
Yes.
And I do as well. I want to thank everybody for their time and effort. And we will continue this conversation next week. And good luck with the good news. Let's hope it has significant import in how you calculate the last and final numbers of your budget. Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you all.